and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I was looking through some of my vast collection of photography magazines the other day, which go back a long way, and I came across a couple of things in this particular edition I'm going to highlight, which I thought might be interesting to share today. So I decided I'd do a Friday flashback, a Friday magazine flashback. The magazine in question is Commercial Photography, an Australian magazine. This edition was January, February 1993. It's going back a while now, isn't it? So what are we, 21, that's about 28 years ago, goodness me. And of course there were changes starting to come into the technology of photography then, and on the front here it says there's a new Nikon camera that they reviewed. I'm going to talk about that, and not that I have one, but I would like one. And also Kodak's digital DCS200 digital camera. So they were just starting to come out with them. So there's the cover. Interesting things there. They're also talking about the Fuji Awards, consider your verdict, and shooting for the fine art market. That's always an interesting topic, isn't it? A lot of people into fine art photography, of course. So where do we start with this? Now there's a interesting bit of technology here. I'll quickly flash that up so you can't see it, and I'm going to tell you why that fits in with this towards the end of the video, so you might have to watch till the end. Anyway, here we go. What do we got in here? The big picture. Robin Gow was the editor of this particular one, and she was talking about the fact that this issue, I just read a little bit from her editorial at the front of this. This issue, we will also bring you a review of Kodak's digital camera, the DCS200. Interest in electronic or digital imaging has reached a high point over the last 2 months, with workshops, seminars and demonstrations happening all over the place. That's all very well, but a lot of photographers, excuse me, need some lubrication. It always happens out here when I start talking. A lot of photographers seem to expect to learn this new technology overnight. Well, I'm still learning, and I guess everyone else is. Suppliers are getting on the bandwagon by offering seminars, but a few of them understand the technology themselves. It will also seem David Myers and Associates is the only company involved, and I know for a fact David has been flat out carting equipment from one studio or show to another over the last 6 months. This is when you physically did things, you didn't do it all by internet. So much so that he has barely had time to use the equipment himself. A lot of photographers have seen the equipment over the last couple of months, but few have seen any creative results. So there you go. That sets the scene for what might come next. Let's see what else I found in here. Have your usual supply of ads, of course. Some books that Ken Duncan was selling successfully at the time, and still does, I think. What have we got here? This was a nice big ad, and of course that's still a popular camera to get on the second-hand market if you're into film, the Canon EOS 1. And that big advertisement there was saying, well, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this 1,000 words was telling you about the camera. So I won't read all of that out to you at the moment, but you can look up what the EOS 1 is. It's still a legendary camera, and that was being advertised around about the time. The story of the EOS 1 doesn't end there. In fact, the best part is yet to come. That's where you go to see your nearest Canon professional dealer and ask to test drive the EOS 1. Tell him you've read the 1,000 words. All you want now are the great pictures. There you go. So we'll move on. What have we got here? People doing actual tours, and people still do that. The true multimedia experience, central experience. This is an author and teacher talking about the true multimedia experience and using a Macintosh system, which I also had a system looking a bit like that one at one stage. And what else have we got? And of course Kodak. Where did Kodak go to? Kodak had a big 2-page spread all about introducing the digital video discs, the Kodak digital imaging chain, film, DCS, DCS200, Macintosh or IBM PC, image library, color edge, Premiere systems. So they were producing, they had a professional, so the idea was you had a Kodak professional DCS200 digital camera and a professional RFS 2035 film scanner, a Kodak Pro Photo CD system, a digital image recorder, LVT Saturn 1010, and a Kodak XLT 7720 digital continuous tone printer. So these are all the things that I just hold that up a bit closer there, that they were focusing in on then and trying to really tell us how good Kodak was at this. And they were trendsetters back then, with particularly with the photo CD. They were the first to, I think, really introduce that. There's another interesting thing here for wedding photographers about mind your manners, all the things apart from the technical stuff of photography, all the things that you're supposed to do as far as the etiquette. And as a former wedding photographer, I would have read that at the time and thought, yep, I agree with all of that. And before the wedding, on the day, at the bride's home, at the ceremony, and at the reception and the follow-up. All those things, there's so much involved in photographing a wedding, isn't there? An ad for the Hasselblad, always a popular camera and always expensive, of course. That was the 503 CS. Now here we go. This is the test report on the digital imaging wars. Does the Kodak DCS200 represent the first piece of armoury in the digital imaging wars? And therefore we have a look at a new camera that was challenging that. I'll just read from the start here. The Nikon F3 based digital camera released by Kodak last year was a tour de force of innovation. It was, however, at around $28,000, a trifle expensive. So when news broke that Kodak was going to manufacture a low-priced digital camera, my interests were instantly aroused. Not that $12,000 for the new colour model is exactly bargain basement, but it does start to look a bit more practical. You could get a colour model apparently and a black and white model of this. I think Leica or someone had a bit of a go at doing that sort of thing, producing exclusive monocolour digital cameras even in this modern age. So the camera uses the Nikon F801S as a base, and while there are some modifications to the camera, the main change is the addition of the digital back. There you go, and it goes on to tell us a lot more about it. The single frame models are intended for studio use with a computer, while the other two are used for location work. The computer can be either IBM and clones or Apple Macintosh, including the Classic and LC models, provided they're fitted with enough RAM. The cost of the complete unit, including a f2.8 28mm AF Nikkor lens, ranges from $9,750 for the single shooter mono to the $12,500 for the 50-shot colour model. You only got 50 shots on the camera. And there's no difference in the resolution between the cameras, as the sensor in each provides 1.5 million pixels, 1.5 megapixels for that sort of cost. That's amazing, isn't it? And it goes on to talk a bit more about that. And I guess there's a picture of it there, you can see it there. And all that digital stuff is the digital back underneath, I think. And quite revolutionary at the time. It was the shape of things to come, but way outside the price of anyone else, I think. But one of the interesting things here, I'm going to tell you about another Nikon camera in a minute, but I'll just go back on this one, which is the Nikon F90. I'm going to talk about that because that was released at the same time. A quick glance at the DCS200's spec sheet will reveal that it is not the answer to every photographer's prayers. But curiously, the main disadvantage for most photographers is not one of quality, rather one of convenience and cost. Consider the mechanics of shooting a roll of transparency film for a moment. Most of us take the shots, drop the exposed film at a lab and collect it a few hours later, the sole capital investment being in the camera gear and the film. In comparison to this relatively painless though time-consuming process, a digital camera user must spend time at the bureau or invest heavily in the appropriate equipment. The overall cost is certainly less than setting up an in-house lab with similar capabilities, but that's about all you can say for it, as the outlay is still considerable. If we take the Mac route, for example, we are looking at around $7,500 for a suitable configured LC, the minimum colour Mac. Now, I had a Macintosh computer system at the time, one of those little boxy looking things, and that cost me about $7,500. Well, a little bit after this came out was when we bought one, because I was trying to get into the digital world with my son and I, doing digital video and all sorts of things. So let's get back to this. So so that was $7,500 for the Mac. Photoshop at the time was about $1,500. The camera itself $12,500, which buys quite a lot of conventional Nikon equipment, and a Kodak XL7700 printer is $32,000. Wow, all up it's around $53,500. On the credit side, running costs of the camera are virtually nil, just wear and tear, and a little electricity to charge the battery in the back. There you go, the camera relied on standard AA cells. The cost of prints runs to about $10 each, which is fine for final copies, but can get a bit expensive for work prints and proofs. So there you go, that was that attempt by Nikon to introduce a digital imaging camera, one of the first ones. Now, what else have we got in here that I was wanting to talk about? Okay, we'll go after this. We'll cut to the chase. And this was introducing. This was a test report on the Nikon F90. There it is. And I looked on the internet today. In Australia, there's about, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe 3, 4 of these for sale at the moment on Australia's Gumtree at the moment around the country. I'd be tempted to get one if I was in the process of buying more stuff instead of getting rid of things, because it's a beautiful camera. Okay, so not just a backup for the F4, the new Nikon F90 features several important features that make it desirable in its own right. Nikon is not known for making a radical approach to camera design. Its model changes tend to be evolutionary rather than revolutionary, and comparatively infrequent. Compatibility of lenses has always also ensured Nikon remains the favourite brand. And Nikon's newest model, the F90, fits in between the F801 and the more professional F4. And this new top-of-the-line SLR is based on the F801 chassis. I have an F601, I don't have an 801, there's a few of them around still, and they're a good camera, but with some significant improvements. And maybe what you can do is, I'll put a link underneath where Ken Rockwell has done a very good summary on this camera, and he talks about one of the things I'm interested in here as well. The camera is a very good camera, but it had this thing called a control back. And the author of this, who was writing this one? Michael Richardson was the author of this. Sorry, thank you, Michael. The control arrangements on the camera itself are straightforward to use and can be understood without an instruction manual, which is a good sign of a camera, and if you're an experienced photographer. The same cannot be said of the MF26 control back fitted to the S version of the F90. Its layout is reminiscent of a digital watch, although at least the buttons are bigger. There's a 100-page instruction booklet to go with it, and unlike the main camera manual, it demands consultation. And there's a whole lot of extra functions that you can use with this program back, but you've got to wade your way through all the 100-page booklet on how to use it. I'm just reading on down here. He was talking about the unwanted things that can go wrong when you're trying to use the exposure back and can't really work it out. But you know what they said at the time, and I was intrigued by this when I bought one of these pieces of equipment. The alternative is to buy a Sharp Electronic Organiser. which is what this is that I flashed up in front of you before. Sharp Electronic Organiser. And I bought one of these when I saw an ad in the local paper, and I'll come back to that article in a minute. But I ended up buying a more sophisticated one of this afterwards. But that's the electronic organiser. I bought this back around about then, whenever this was printed, 1993. So I would have bought this around about then. And the reason I got it was that there was an ad in the paper that says you can be organised, forgetting appointments, not doing this, not doing that, not paying your bills, and that was me. And so I rang up the person who had put the ad, or the company, Sharp it must have been, and they sent round a person to the workplace where I was working and brought a demonstration model round to show me. I was working in Telecom Australia at the time, and this guy brought it round, and I said, well, I wouldn't know how to use it. I knew nothing about computers. This is when none of us had computers on our desks back then, and but our kids had gaming computers and things like that. So anyway, he said, I'll tell you what, he said, I'll let you have it for a week, no cost, no nothing, and then let me know what you want to do afterward. And I thought, what? Wow, he's trusting me to take this. And they weren't cheap. You know, they were about, I don't know, maybe $300 or more or something at the time. And anyway, he lent it to me. I took it home. I didn't have any idea about computers or how to use them. And my youngest son, Daniel, was about 11 at the time. And I just gave it to him and I said, Daniel, work out how this works and then show me how to use it. And he did. And I couldn't get over it. Within about an hour, he was actually doing little cartoons on the screen with little stick figures. I don't know how he did that. Anyway, that was my entry into the world of computing. Once I learned how to use that, I then was confident to go on to other types of computers. But the interesting thing is that this data back that they have on the now, one of the things that you see on here, you have these cards come in and out. You can put different functions. They had very little memory in these things, but they were functional. They had a calendar and calculators and world clock, telephone book, memo, calculator, a calendar, card. You could delete, you could do all sorts of stuff. A user dictionary. Anyway, and there's a little keypad down the bottom. But you could get interchangeable cards. This one here has actually got an 8-language translator in it. So the idea was that if you went overseas, you could take this with you and you could just dial up whatever language you wanted, whatever words, and you could dial up a number of 8 different languages to see what that phrase was. You know, where is the nearest toilet? You know, you could be in France or somewhere, and it would give you the words, and you show that to the person and they tell you. So anyway, you could get a whole number. You could get other cards to go in to actually, I'll just take this one out. See, that just comes out, slides back in there. But you could actually increase your memory using that. But also, what I was getting at before was that the alternative to all the confusion with this data back on the F90 was the fact that the alternative was to buy a Sharp Electronic Organiser, or EO as they call them. Later on, as they brought out more sophisticated models by other manufacturers, they were called PDAs, I think, Personal Digital Assistants, and they were quite sophisticated, some of those. The alternative is to buy a Sharp Electronic Organiser, or EO. Yes, later this year the computerisation of photography will take another giant leap forward. Linked up to the camera via a special IC card and connecting cord, the palm-size EO will help guide you through the maze of operations. You can also use it to reprogram the MF26 data back on your Nikon F90 and camera functions as a memo holder for a huge range of exposure information, and scroll through a basic guide to photography. There you go. Now we have apps on our phones that enable us to control our phones and our drones and all that sort of stuff. But this was probably the forerunner of that extra control of controlling a camera. I never ever saw anyone, when I got this and I read the instruction manual, it told me that I could hook it up to a camera, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of anyone who's ever done it or seen the equipment that people have used to do it. But there you go, you might want to do some research. I did a little bit of research on it, and I found my way to Ken Rockwell's website, I think it was, and I'll put a link underneath where he mentions this and whether it was worthwhile or not, I think, and also a good review of the Nikon F90. I was intrigued by the F90 when a young guy who was working in the film lab that I used to take my wedding photos to, he actually had one and he showed me the results of a recent, he was just getting into weddings, and the results of some automatic fill flash, that the flash that went with it, plus the camera did automatically, quite a difficult situation to balance the exposure with your fill flash and still have the background not washed out and all that sort of stuff. I was very impressed. So I've always been interested in the Nikon F90, which later on was replaced by the F100. And who knows, I might get one these days. I've got a couple of Nikon digital SLRs and a couple of Nikon film SLRs, but there comes a time when you've got to not buy new stuff and get rid of the stuff you've got. Anyway, that was Friday Flashback for today, so I hope you found that interesting. I'm still working on other stuff, particularly some more stuff on the boat trip that's proving to be a bit lengthy, and I'm not sure. I think I might have it it's out to about 35 minutes at the moment, so I'm going to have to cut that one back a bit. A boat trip in the Proud Mary on the Murray River. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Like if you like, subscribe if you wish, and have a good weekend. It is Friday. See you later.